And so to see that woman get lost and find herself again and get lost again, like that to me was really compelling and exciting. I mean, to me, it felt so clear and so obvious who Lily should be, but I also felt deeply protective of her from the moment that I read her story, that like if she was interpreted in any other way other than how I saw her, that would have been very upsetting to me as a fan, as an audience member, which I imagine is how all fans feel. It was just important to me to show a woman of multitudes, to show a woman.
I think that like Baz Luhrmann and I are probably the two people who love romance more than anyone ever. Like I see fireworks and I realize it's probably, you know, visions of fireworks, but like that's how I just love romance. So Colleen.
Yeah. So like he's the king, you're the queen.
Oh, wow. My gosh. Thank you. I think my Ryan, the king, he's so romantic.
Is he?
The stare, Gosling's got that stare thing for sure. He does that stare
So
thing.
you're also not voting for my Ryan?
Well, I think Ryan is incredibly romantic. By the way he wines and dines me.
Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. There's been a lot of buzz about It Ends With Us, and one moment in particular stands out. Back in November 2023, Blake suddenly delayed filming. And this is when the entire 17-point discussion about her on-set requirements came into play. Every single detail had to be negotiated, and all of her demands had to be met, or she simply wasn't returning to set. This all happened on November 9th. But why that specific day? Why, out of nowhere, did they send this letter on November 9th, insisting that everything had to be resolved immediately? There had already been such a long gap between when filming stopped due to the strike and when it resumed, without any tension or conflicts. No fights, no disagreements. Blake had previously asked to see some footage from the film, but Bond had refused, saying he wasn't going to bring it to her. Still, there weren't any real problems at that point. So why, on November 9th, did she suddenly drop this email saying she wouldn't return unless her demands were met? There was absolutely no prior indication of any issues. It just didn't add up. I think I may have found the answer, and honestly, it might surprise you. Or maybe not. You might have seen this coming, or maybe you wouldn't be shocked at all. Either way, the answer has everything to do with filming schedules. On November 9th, Ryan Reynolds officially announced that Deadpool 3 would resume filming. They had planned to restart production just before Thanksgiving in 2023, with the majority of the filming taking place in the UK. Most of Deadpool 3 had already been shot there and in Vancouver, though a small portion was filmed in the US. The final stretch of filming wrapped up in the UK. Ryan's movie, which had also been delayed because of the strike, was now set to film from November 23rd until January 24th in England. The official announcement about filming resuming came out on November 9th, the exact same day that Blake Lively sent her list of demands to Wayfarer even before they started filming. This is where things start to make sense. Ryan was about to begin shooting Deadpool 3, and Blake had already committed to this project, meaning they would both be filming at the same time. That also meant they wouldn't be together, and this really upset Ryan. He did not want to be separated from Blake at all. Justin, the director, took an unusual step by reaching out to Ryan personally, assuring him that he would try to wrap up Blake's filming a few days earlier than planned. I found it strange that a film director would contact an actress's husband just to promise him that she'd be sent home as soon as possible. But he did. And when Ryan responded, he thanked Justin, saying he truly appreciated his understanding of how important it was for their family to reunite as quickly as possible. He also mentioned that Blake felt the exact same way. He emphasized how they were deeply wired to stay together as a family, and that being apart was really hard on them. It's just how they are. He even admitted that splitting up would be incredibly difficult for them, saying, "It's how to win us, and it's also how to kill us when we can't." They never separate, ever. It was a huge deal for them throughout this process. Ryan even tried to push back his start date, but since Marvel had already booked the studios back in July, the timing was locked in. He had been working tirelessly, smashing out his third pass of the script, not just to fix structural changes, but also to reduce the budget and shorten the shoot. Ryan even mentioned that he could fly back with the girls once school started. He acknowledged and appreciated the fact that they had already made significant adjustments to accommodate Blake's schedule, especially since she had already committed to another film. Thankfully, she was able to push that project back gracefully. He also admitted that she had tried to do so earlier, but hadn't shared just how difficult it was. Then, in a surprisingly candid moment, Ryan joked, saying he'd have his line. Producers face-tuned to his Pentium if they could somehow start filming 2 weeks earlier. He understood how big of an ask that was, but emphasized that the Pentium is one of the most sensitive parts of the human body to expose to trauma. His tone was lighthearted, but the underlying frustration was clear. He wrapped up by saying he looked forward to seeing them and thanked them again for their efforts. But here's the thing. Ryan was fully admitting how uncomfortable they both were about working on separate projects at the same time. The real issue wasn't just about scheduling conflicts. It was the fact that they wouldn't be together. He wanted his family close, no matter what. And then there's the fact that Blake wasn't allowed to be in a room alone with another man unless a third person was present. She always had to have a chaperone, which, to me, just screams jealous. Husband. It feels like his inability to be there, to oversee everything, and to have full control over the situation was really the driving force behind all of this. And honestly, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's clear that they both had strong motivations for making sure things worked in their favor. There's no doubt that Ryan wanted control over this film, but beyond that, I truly believe there was also a deeper motivation to alienate certain people from the process. On top of that, his jealousy played a major role. He didn't want Blake flirting, didn't want her around other men alone, and frankly, it seems like he didn't trust her. But maybe that's because he doesn't trust himself. After all, Ryan has a history of being unfaithful. I know it can be hard for some people to understand that multiple factors can exist at the same time, but in this case, it's clear. There were conflicting motivations at play. His jealousy was definitely a factor, and he simply didn't want her away from him for too long. Then, the moment Ryan announced on November 9th that Deadpool 3 would resume filming, Blake's lawyers immediately sent an email out of nowhere, saying she wouldn't be returning to work unless certain demands were met. What's strange is that her team had already been informed that filming would resume on November 27th, while Deadpool was set to start on November 23rd. This meant Ryan would be filming in the UK, while Blake would be in New Jersey, completely separate from each other. He did not want them working on projects at the same time, and it became obvious. That same day, Jamie Heath reached out, making it clear that they needed to be aligned. He sent over schedules and updates on productions in New Jersey, but then Blake's attorneys responded with a list of non-negotiable demands. These demands not only disrupted production, but also strongly suggested that Belden and Heath had acted inappropriately. By November 10th, they had to scramble to figure out their response. They were working with Sony, carefully assessing what they could agree to, what they absolutely couldn't, and what they legally weren't able to admit. Then, they got word that Blake said she could be available starting December 5th. However, before she committed to anything, she wanted to see the revised script pages and a one-liner breakdown. The back and forth continued, and by November 11th, Wayfair's legal team finally responded, trying to sort through the chaos. In an effort to keep things moving and make sure the film stays on track, they reached out to address some of Blake's key requests. Specifically, she wanted to see the revised one-liner, the updated script pages, and a rough cut of the unfinished movie. They made it clear they were fully prepared to send over the one-liner and script pages as soon as they got the green light, and just needed to confirm the best way to get them to her. As for the rough cut, they offered to set up a screening at any facility of Blake's choice within the New York area, ideally at Company 3, since it already had the necessary materials. If she had a different location in mind, they were open to making arrangements, though they'd need some time to set it up. To make her more comfortable, the director even offered to step away during the screening if she preferred, sending notes afterward instead. Blake was also welcome to bring anyone she wanted with her. They made these accommodations, but just 2 days later, Wayfair sent another email saying they had heard Blake might actually be in London at the moment. Since that was the case, they offered to set up the screening there instead, as Company 3 had a facility in London as well. The timing of it all made sense. Blake was already in London because Ryan was about to start filming Deadpool 3 on the 23rd. She had made it a priority to be with him while he was preparing to finish up filming. Then, on December 3rd, her legal team responded, stating that they weren't open to further negotiations and that a specific set of protections had to be signed, no exceptions. By the 15th, it was confirmed that Blake would not be available for filming in November, which meant production had to be pushed back again, this time to December. A new start date of December 11th was set, and by November 20th, they confirmed that Wayfair and Blake's team had approved the addition of an A-list producer. That producer was introduced to Baldoni and Heath as they continued trying to get Blake on set by December 11th. Meanwhile, Ryan had already begun filming Deadpool 3 in the UK, which meant she was right there with him. Despite all the last-minute adjustments, Blake ultimately wasn't available when filming was set to start, so production was delayed once again, this time until January. The reason? Ryan wanted her by his side. He made it clear she needed to be there with him, prioritizing their time together over her own work commitments. He actively interfered with her schedule, making sure she remained with him rather than working on her own project. It was becoming more and more obvious how much control he had over the situation, ensuring that she stayed close and didn't work when he didn't want her to. At some point, Ryan decides he wants Blake to make a cameo in Deadpool 3, which is likely when he came up with the idea to introduce Lady Deadpool. This would have been around the same time they were filming the nice pool scenes. While everyone else was waiting for production to resume, Ryan was busy filming Deadpool content, and Blake was right there with him, appearing as Lady Deadpool in a scene where she kills Boney, or Nice Pool, in front of a flower shop. I don't believe she was originally supposed to be in the film at all. It feels like this entire character was created out of spite, as a way for Ryan to retaliate against Boney, since it's clear they were having issues. Ryan seems to love adding these little Easter eggs, and this move definitely felt intentional. What makes it even more suspicious is that Wayfair had absolutely no idea Blake was involved in Deadpool 3 in any way. Meanwhile, the constant delays with her other project started to make a lot more sense. Ryan clearly wanted her by his side, working with him, instead of being away on another film set. Rather than letting her focus on her own work, he found ways to keep her around, making it seem like she simply wasn't available for the other film. He used that time to gain more control over the situation, ensuring that everything played out in a way that benefited him. Eventually, after all these delays, they finally agreed that Blake would return to work in January. That led to the big January 4th meeting, where the next steps were discussed. By this point, both Ryan and Blake were in New York together, and, unsurprisingly, she had Ryan right there with her at the meeting, making sure he remained involved in everything. The pattern was obvious. He wasn't just influencing the delays, he was actively shaping how and when she worked, ensuring that she stayed within his orbit rather than prioritizing her own commitments. On January 4th, a meeting was held at Blake and Ryan's New York apartment ahead of the planned production restart. Attending were Boney, Heath, a Sony executive, a producer, an A-list producer, and the film's first AD. The team arrived fully prepared, carrying production binders, eager to get back to work. However, Lively had something completely different in mind. Instead of discussing the next phase of filming, she pulled out her phone and began reading from her notes, listing a series of alleged infractions from Phase 1. Right after, Ryan turned on Boney, demanding that he apologize to Blake for actions that either never took place or had been twisted beyond recognition. Boney, refusing to take responsibility for things he hadn't done, stood his ground, which only seemed to enrage Ryan further. The room was tense, and the confrontation left everyone in shock. Even the A-list producer, who had been specifically brought on at Lively's request, was visibly stunned. In their 40-year career, they admitted they had never witnessed anyone being spoken to in such a manner during a meeting. Later, the Sony representative reflected on the incident, confessing that they regretted not stepping in to de-escalate Ryan's outburst. What made the situation even stranger was that they had already agreed to Blake's demands. The contracts were signed, and the meeting was meant to be a formality to move forward. But instead of leaving the past behind, Blake showed up reading from a phone, as if she needed a script to remember what had supposedly happened to her. From January 1st to February 9th, filming resumed, and according to Blake, absolutely nothing happened while she was on set. She and Ryan were apart for about 2 to 3 weeks, during which he was busy with Deadpool 3 post-production, while Boney focused on wrapping up It Ends With Us. Interestingly, both films were set for summer releases, which meant their schedules were always overlapping. And looking back, most of the major conflicts seemed to arise whenever they were filming at the same time or needed to be apart. It's no coincidence that this pattern kept repeating. It really seems like Ryan didn't want Blake away from him, especially not around Boney. He wanted Boney to be seen as a threat, which makes it clear he was acting like a jealous husband. But what's even stranger is how he took it upon himself to be the mediator in that meeting. Normally, Blake should have been able to advocate for herself. She has agents, lawyers, and an entire team representing her interests. Yet, instead of relying on them, she had Ryan there, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it brought in a deeply personal connection rather than legal protection. The way Ryan was demanding apologies for things that never even happened was unsettling, and when he started yelling at Boney on January 4th, it really felt like he was doing it out of frustration. Almost as if he was upset that filming was about to resume and needed to make it clear that he was in control. It wasn't just about defending Blake, it was about asserting dominance over Boney. After that confrontation, production finally resumed, and Ryan returned to New York when they wrapped on January 24th, while Blake continued filming until February 9th. But here's the thing. During that entire period, absolutely nothing bad happened. No conflicts, no chaos, nothing. The real drama always seemed to surface whenever Ryan and Blake were together. It's as if every issue, every roadblock, was tied to their dynamic. That pattern is hard to ignore, and it raises a big question. Was it really about the film, or was it about control? Whenever Blake and Ryan are together, chaos seems to follow. But when they're apart, everything on set runs smoothly. It's almost as if Ryan's presence alone creates problems, turning her job into a mess, causing unnecessary obstacles, and stirring up conflict. At this point, it seems clear they had a plan to take over the film, and the way things unfolded makes it hard to believe otherwise. A lot of these issues, particularly the sexual harassment allegations, seem to have been used as leverage to gain more control over the production. Just look at that list of demands. It's all about control. It's about getting what she wants, including power over producers, creative decisions, and even which lines are used. One of the demands she made, which she even included in her amended complaint, was that she should never be asked to cross a picket line. But here's the thing. Ryan walked across picket lines until July 14th. His set never shut down during the writer's strike, even though he himself is a writer. He kept working on Deadpool 3, both as a writer and an actor, right up until the actors went on strike. His production was being actively picketed, yet he crossed those lines without hesitation. Meanwhile, Blake was telling Boney she couldn't do the same. The double standard is hard to ignore. It's like, rules for thee, but not for me. Ryan wasn't just trying to support his wife, he was trying to control everything. The sexual harassment claims emerged right when they were mad, right when he didn't want her involved with that team. It's all connected. His jealousy, his need for power, and his unwillingness to let her out of his sight. Blake, on the other hand, wanted control for herself too. This was her big moment to step back into the spotlight, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. When you zoom in on the details, instead of just looking at the big picture, it becomes even clearer. This wasn't just about work, it was about power. The deeper you dig, the more it all starts making sense. But what do you think? Did you know about this? Have any other creators covered this? Has anyone else noticed this pattern? I don't watch a lot of other coverage, but I'd love to hear if people are picking up on the same things. I don't follow a lot of other creators, so I'm not sure how much of this has been covered. I'm just sharing what I find as I go. But now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all of this? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. I always love reading your takes. Do you think this theory makes sense? Or do you have a different perspective? Let's get the conversation going. And hey, while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you go. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps me out with the algorithm. The more engagement, the more people see this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys!